All right, so have you ever wondered how much those waiters on cruise ships actually make?
It's a question we get a lot, actually.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, you see them hustling around, taking care of everyone, and you can't help but wonder, right? What's in it for them?
Right?
And especially, how do the different cruise lines compare? Like, is a waiter on a luxury line raking it in compared to someone on a more budget-friendly ship?
Well, that's what we are going to try to find out today.
Exactly. So you sent over this really interesting discussion from a cruise critic forum. It all started with someone sharing an article comparing waiter-based salaries, which seemed like a pretty good starting point.
Yeah, base salaries are definitely part of the equation.
But here's the thing. The forum discussion itself is kind of revealing. It shows how much we might not actually know about these salaries.
That's the thing about the cruise industry. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes.
So true. Okay, so just to set the scene,
Mm.
this discussion was happening on a forum specifically for fans of Crystal Cruises.
Crystal, they have a reputation for top-notch service.
Right. So the person who started the thread was super happy to see that Crystal waiters were listed as some of the best paid in the industry. But then another user jumped in and was like, hold on a second.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. They pointed out that the comparison might be flawed because it lumps all-inclusive lines like Crystal, where tips are already included in the fare, together with lines that have the more traditional tipping model.
That's a really important distinction. If you're on a cruise where the tips are already included, those waiters are essentially getting a guaranteed gratuity.
Exactly. And that's going to skew the numbers, right?
Hmm.
It's not an apples-to-apples comparison.
Not at all. And this actually highlights a much bigger point about those salary figures we see floating around. They're usually just the base pay. They don't tell the whole story.
Okay, so base salary plus extras equals total compensation.
Exactly. You've got to factor in those tips, which are also called gratuities, and things like work rules, what kind of perks they get on board, and even how long their contract is.
So many variables.
It's more complicated than you might think.
Yeah, and even just figuring out the base salary is harder than it seems. There's this whole debate in the forum about whether those numbers in the article referred to pay per contract, pay per month, or what. People were genuinely confused.
Yeah, it highlights a common problem with data, even in an industry as seemingly transparent as cruising. You need to know what those numbers represent to make a meaningful comparison.
Right, like, is this person making $2,000 a month or $2,000 for the entire 6 months they're on the ship? Big difference.
Huge difference, and without that context, the data is practically meaningless.
Fortunately, in this case, another forum member swooped in to save the day. They clarified that, according to the Sea Life website, these salaries are listed per month.
Sea Life, that's a great resource for anyone interested in maritime careers.
Yeah, they seem to have the inside scoop. So, okay, that's helpful. We know it's a monthly figure. But here's where things get even more interesting.
I'm intrigued.
The original poster, the one who was excited about the crystal salaries, they mentioned that most cruise lines now include prepaid gratuities in the booking price. Apparently, only like 2% of Royal Caribbean passengers actually opt out of these prepaid tips.
That is interesting. So you're basically paying your tips up front before you even step foot on the ship.
Yeah, it's like an automatic gratuity. And it made me wonder if cruise lines might be using this system to guarantee a certain level of income for their waiters, regardless of how much individual passengers might tip.
Oh, like a safety net. It kind of changes the whole dynamic of tipping.
Right. Makes you wonder, are passengers even aware that they're prepaying these gratuities? And if those prepaid gratuities are already baked in, how does that affect the base salary that the cruise lines are offering?
That's a great point. If the base salary is lower because those prepaid gratuities are factored in, could waiters actually be earning less overall than they used to under the old tipping model?
Yeah, there are so many layers here. We started off thinking we just needed to figure out base salary, but it's way more complicated than that.
It's a complex ecosystem, that's for sure.
And to make things even more complicated, remember that Sea Life website, the one that clarified the monthly salary thing? Well, it actually contradicts that original article about Crystal waiter salaries.
Oh no, conflicting data.
Yep, the article claimed that Crystal waiters were earning a certain base salary, but Sea Life, which seems to be pretty up to date, has them making considerably less.
Huh, that is strange. Maybe the article was using old data. Or they were looking at a very specific type of waiter role that has a higher pay grade.
Yeah, without knowing their methodology, it's hard to say for sure.
It does highlight how important it is to be critical of the data you encounter. Always consider the source and look for potential biases.
You're right, it's like detective work. We need to examine the evidence carefully. So we've got a little bit of a data mystery on our hands. But even if we could solve it and figure out exactly what the base salary for a Crystal waiter is, we know that's not the whole story.
Exactly. We still need to factor in all those other variables we talked about. Gratuities, contract length, work rules, perks. Even the economic conditions in a waiter's home country can play a role.
Wow, it's a lot to think about. But it makes this whole topic even more interesting.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know, I can't wait to dive deeper.
Me too. This is going to be fun. So you had some questions about those cruise ship waiter contracts.
Oh yeah, I definitely want to dig into that. We touched on it earlier, how those contracts can really impact a waiter's overall earnings, but there's so much more to it than just how long they are, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Look.
But yeah, the length is a big one. I mean, we're talking about differences of months.
That's what I was thinking. So what kind of range are we looking at here? Like, what did you find in the sources about the typical length of these contracts?
Well, it seems like the shortest ones might be around 4 months, but then some can go all the way up to 9 months or even longer.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not just affecting how much someone makes over the year. That's got to impact our whole experience working on a cruise ship, wouldn't you think?
Oh, totally. It changes everything. I mean, think about it. Someone on a 4-month contract, they're getting to go home and see their family more often.
Yeah, that's a plus.
But then they have to go through the hassle of finding a new contract more frequently.
That's true. It's like a trade-off, right?
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have those 9-month contracts. More stability, sure, but you're also making a much bigger commitment in terms of time away from home.
Yeah, it's like choosing between a bunch of short sprints versus running a marathon. Each has its own, advantages and disadvantages.
I like that analogy. And it seems like these contract lengths can vary not only from person to person, but also from cruise line to cruise line. Some companies seem to prefer those shorter contracts.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and others lean more towards those longer ones.
Interesting. Okay, so that's contract length.
Yeah.
What else did you find out about these contracts? Like, what other juicy details are in there?
Well, besides how long they are, the contracts also lay out all kinds of other terms and conditions, like what are the arrangements for their accommodation, their meals, do they get medical coverage?
That's important.
What happens if there's an emergency and they need to get home, and even things like disciplinary procedures, it's all in there.
Wow, it sounds like they cover everything. It's like a whole legal system for a floating city.
That's a perfect way to put it. And yeah, all those details, they might seem kind of boring on the surface, but they can really have a big impact on a waiter's day-to-day life, their job satisfaction.
Oh, I bet. I mean, can you imagine being stuck on a ship for months with a contract that doesn't guarantee you decent food or, like, a comfortable place to sleep?
It doesn't bear thinking about. So, yeah, it's really important for anyone considering a job as a cruise ship waiter to scrutinize those contracts carefully. Don't just get dazzled by the salary number. You got to read the fine print and make sure you understand all the terms and conditions.
Right, because those extras, so to speak, can really make or break the experience. Speaking of extras, earlier we were talking about gratuities, those tips that passengers give. You mentioned you were curious about how that all works in practice.
Yeah, I'm still a little fuzzy on the specifics. Like, I get that some lines include prepaid gratuities in the fare. But what about the others? How do waiters actually get those tips?
Well, it seems like there are a few different systems. Sometimes all the tips that get collected are put together into a big pool, and then they're divided up among the crew, like according to a formula.
Oh, so it's not necessarily just going to the waiter who served you directly?
Right, it's more of a team effort kind of thing.
Interesting. So, like, the chefs in the galley, the people who are cleaning the cabins, they're all benefiting from those tips too.
It seems that way, yeah. It's really about recognizing, like, the collective effort that goes into making that smooth cruise experience happen.
I like that. It's a shared appreciation, everyone working together.
Exactly. Which brings us to another question you had. How much are we actually talking about here? Are there any guidelines for, how much to tip on a cruise?
Most cruise lines do offer suggestions for gratuity amounts. And usually it's somewhere between like $15 to $20 per person per day.
Okay, so that gives us a rough idea. But is that like for everything, or is it separate, like for dining and then for stateroom services?
It's usually split. You'll have one suggested amount for your dining services and then another one for the stateroom services.
Okay, got it. So like if they're suggesting $15 a day for dining, that money's getting split between, your waiter, the assistant waiter, and maybe even other dining staff that we don't see as much.
Exactly.
And same for the stateroom gratuities. That suggested amount is split among the folks taking care of your cabin.
Yeah, the cabin stewards and all the housekeeping staff.
This is really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to understand this whole gratuity system a lot better now.
It is interesting when you start breaking it all down, isn't it? And like we discussed earlier, those gratuities, they can really add up to a significant chunk of a waiter's income, especially if those prepaid gratuities are already factored into that base salary calculation.
It's all connected, right? The base salary, the gratuities, the length of the contract, all these pieces fitting together to make that whole compensation puzzle.
It really is. And there's actually one more piece we haven't even talked about yet. Those additional perks and benefits that can sweeten the deal for cruise ship waiters.
Oh, yeah. Like what? Free cruises for life.
Maybe not that extreme. But a lot of cruise lines do offer some pretty nice perks to their crew. For one thing, their accommodation and meals on board are usually provided for free.
Oh, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be pretty tough to live and work on a ship if you had to pay rent and buy your own groceries on top of everything else.
Totally. And beyond those basics, a lot of cruise lines give their crew access to, like, the recreational facilities on board, gyms, swimming pools, sometimes even movie theaters and game rooms.
So they actually get to have some fun and unwind even though they're working long hours.
Exactly. And some companies go even further, offering things like discounts on shore excursions, crew parties, or even training programs to help them learn new skills.
Wow, that's starting to sound like a pretty sweet gig. Travel the world, meet people, and enjoy some pretty cool perks along the way. I mean, it's hard work, but those extras got to be nice.
Absolutely. And it's important to note that these perks can vary a lot from cruise line to cruise line. Some have a reputation for taking really good care of their crew,
Oh, I bet.
and others, not so much.
That's like any job, I guess. You got to do your research and find an employer whose values, align with yours.
Yeah, exactly. And there are websites like Sea Life and Crew Center.
Yeah.
Crew members actually share their experiences there.
Oh, that's a good tip.
Yeah, you can get a glimpse behind the curtain and see what it's really like to work for different cruise lines.
Love that. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We started with a simple question about salaries, and now we're talking about contracts and tips and all these other fascinating aspects of the cruise industry.
It's amazing where a single thread can lead you.
And through it all, I think we've really gained a better understanding of how this whole compensation thing works. It's much more complex than you might initially think.
It definitely is. We've seen that base salary, it's just one piece of the puzzle. And we've learned about all those other factors that play a role in shaping a waiter's experience, their earnings, everything.
It's all about digging beneath the surface, right? Not
Right.
taking things at face value.
Exactly. That's how you uncover the real story.
I love that. So, okay, as you plan your next cruise vacation, remember what we've talked about today. Those waiters, the cabin stewards, all those folks who work so hard to make your trip enjoyable, they're not just smiling faces. They're individuals with their own lives, their own ambitions.
Exactly. And remember, this whole time we've been focusing on waiters, but they're only one small part of this massive, intricate system. Think of all the other roles: bartenders, chefs, musicians, the entertainment staff, the engineers who keep those ships running.
It's like a whole floating city, thousands of people working behind the scenes.
And each of those jobs has its own set of compensation considerations: salary, tips, benefits, contract terms. It's a lot to take in.
So the next time you're on a cruise, really take a moment to think about the people behind the scenes, the folks working hard to make everything so seamless.
Right. And they're often far away from their families and homes, making sacrifices to provide for their loved ones.
It's easy to forget that when you're caught up in all the excitement and fun of a cruise, but it's really important to keep in mind. Even in a glamorous industry like this, everyone's dealing with, real life stuff. Economic pressures, personal challenges, it's all there.
So yeah, treat those crew members with kindness and respect. Tip generously if you can. Acknowledge their efforts.
Exactly. And also think about the choices you make as a consumer. Supporting cruise lines that treat their employees fairly, offer decent working conditions, that's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. It all makes a difference. So there you have it. We've explored this fascinating world of cruise ship compensation, uncovered some hidden truths, and hopefully helped you become more informed travelers in the process.
And, this is a perfect example of how, like you said, following one little thread can lead to a whole world of discovery. Stay curious, ask questions, don't be afraid to challenge assumptions. You never know what you might find.
Well said. And who knows what other deep dives await. Until next time, bon voyage.
Happy sailing. Isn't it wild how we started this whole deep dive trying to figure out how much cruise ship waiters make? And look where we ended up.
It's like falling down a rabbit hole of fascinating information.
Right. We went from base salaries to prepaid gratuities to contract negotiations. We even touched on the ethical side of how these cruise lines are treating their employees. It's been a journey.
We really had to put on our detective hats to figure out this whole compensation mystery.
But I think we did a pretty good job, don't you think? We went way beyond just looking at those initial salary numbers.
Absolutely. We saw how base salary is really just the tip of the iceberg, and then we explored how all those other factors, the gratuities, the contract length, even those extra perks, can really affect a waiter's earnings and their overall quality of life.
It's like there's always more to the story, right? You can't just look at the surface. You got to dig deeper.
Exactly. That's how you get to the good stuff, the juicy details.
I love that. So, next time you're planning a cruise, remember everything we've talked about. Remember those waiters, the cabin stewards, all those crew members who work so hard to make your vacation amazing. They're not just smiling faces, you know?
Right. They're real people. They have their own lives, their own hopes and dreams.
And remember, we've been focusing on waiters this whole time, but they're only one small part of this huge system. Think about all those other jobs on a cruise ship. Bartenders, chefs, the musicians, the dancers, even the engineers who keep the ship running.
It takes a village, or, in this case, a floating city, thousands of people working behind the scenes to create this seamless, enjoyable experience for the passengers.
Exactly. So the next time you're on a cruise, enjoying a delicious meal or watching a show, take a minute to think about the folks who made it all happen, all that hard work that goes on behind the scenes.
A lot of those crew members are far away from their homes and their families. They're making real sacrifices.
It's true. And it's easy to forget that when you're caught up in all the fun of a cruise vacation. But it's important to remember that even in a glamorous industry like cruising, there are real people dealing with real-life challenges. Economic pressures, personal struggles, it's all there.
So be kind, be respectful, tip generously when you can, acknowledge the hard work that these folks are doing.
Absolutely. And, your choices as a consumer make a difference, too. When you support cruise lines that are known for treating their employees well, you're voting with your wallet.
You really are. It's about choosing to support a more ethical and sustainable industry. So there you have it. We've gone deep into this world of cruise ship compensation. We've uncovered some things that you might not have known before. And hopefully we've given you some things to think about as you plan your future travels.
And this is just one example of how a simple question can lead us down a path of discovery. You just got to stay curious, keep asking questions, and you never know what you might learn.
Absolutely. Well said. So until our next deep dive, bon voyage.
And happy sailing, everyone.